Hi, welcome to the OSIsoft Learning channel on YouTube. Today we're going to install PI Server 2012 on a blank Windows Server 2008 machine. We'll be using the documentation to help us through the process, so why don't we go and download the install and upgrade guide from the OSIsoft download site. So I'm going to go to techsupport.osisoft.com. In the link bar, hover over Download Center, then hover over Documentation, and then from that menu, select User Manuals. When we get here, we just need to select the product that we want our user manual for, and in this case, that's going to be the PI Server. Hit the search button, and the search results will come back, showing you all the manuals available for the PI Server. We want the one called Installation and Upgrade Guide, and in this case we want it for PI Server 2012 because that's the version we're using. So I'm just going to save this. Then I'll go ahead and open it up. And it opens to the last section I was using, and that section is Install a new PI Server. We can see that the first thing we need to do are the PI Server pre-installation tasks. And it tells us we need to go see the Installation Worksheet on page 71. I decided to make a copy of this in a text document because that's just easier for me to fill out while I'm doing the installation.
In order to understand the first question on this worksheet, we need to talk for a second or two about the PI system architecture. The PI system consists of several components, and one of them is the PI server, which is the data historian. And another component in this system is AF, which is our asset-based tool for organizing and finding your data. Well, AF actually uses a SQL server as its back end. And because the PI server now requires AF, that means that you're going to have to install a SQL server and AF before you can install your PI server. So for smaller systems, we can put everything on a single machine. For this size system, we're going to put everything on one box, and the name of our machine that we're working on right now is Chestnut. The name of the machine I'm working on today is Chestnut. So we don't have the SQL Server installed yet, but we're going to install it on this machine. And if we're putting the SQL Server on the same machine as the PI Server, we must use the Express edition because SQL Server Express has certain built-in limits that will prevent us from having resource competition between the SQL Server and the PI Server. So again, we're putting everything on one machine. So the AF server name is going to be the same. It'll be Chestnut. And the PI server name will also be the same. It will be Chestnut. And we're going to accept the defaults from the install kit for all of the binary locations. So that includes the SDK, the API, and when we get further down this sheet also where the PI server files are going to go. I actually have not yet downloaded my license activation file, but when I do get it, we'll just put it in our regular downloads folder. Now the next question is whether or not we want to enable the module database. And typically, unless you know for certain that you're not going to need the module database, we would recommend enabling it. There are several products that still make use of the module database, and unless you're certain you won't use them, it's best just to turn it on. So we'll be accepting the default for the binaries. Before we talk about where to put the event queues, maybe we should have a look at the manual and see what it recommends for the locations of different files on the PI server. We can find this on page 20, and you'll have to forgive me, but I'm actually going to read to you from the manual. So it says, by default, the setup program installs PI server binary files in the program files PI directory. And then for the archive files, they're installed on the volume with the most free disk space. The event queues are then installed on the volume with the second most free disk space. So the setup program is actually optimizing the locations of the files for us. What that's going to mean for us is that we can just accept the defaults when we're running through the install process. So on my install sheet, I'm just going to write down that we'll be accepting the defaults. Now that we've worked our way through the entire install worksheet, the next thing to do is begin installing SQL Server Express. I've downloaded the SQL Server Express install kit and the AF install kit from the Technical Support download site. I've also downloaded a white paper telling us exactly what we need to do through every step of the SQL Server install. And that's published by OSIsoft to help you with your SQL Server Express installation. Note that it only applies to the Express edition. So let's go ahead and get started with installing SQL Server Express. The very first thing we'll need to do before installing SQL Server Express is to enable .NET Framework 3.5. This is done through the Server Manager in Windows Server 2008. So from the Server Manager, we just need to go to Roles and add a role. And we'll need to add the Application Server role. Click the Add Required Features button. Click Next a few times, and then just wait for the progress bars to complete. Now that .NET 3.5 has been installed, we can go ahead and run our SQL Server Express install kit. We're going to select New SQL Server Standalone Installation. Accept the terms of the license agreement. And it asks you whether you'd like to get updates or not. It's always a good idea to get the updates when they're recommended, rather than having to download them later and then reboot the server at a later date. We're going to accept the default features here, and as we move on to the next screen, you'll see the question of what we want to name the SQL Server instance. There's nothing wrong with keeping SQL Express, so we'll just accept the defaults there. We also want to check the account names that the services are running as. It's very important that these accounts not have administrative privileges. They also want to select an account that's going to be the local database admin for the SQL Server. By default, it's going to add whatever account is running the install kit. That's good, but it's only one user, and we think it's more useful to just add the entire administrators group. Your account that you're running the SQL Server install kit at should already be part of that group, so you'll still have permissions even when you're done. Okay, so we've got our administrators group in there. Don't forget to remove the user that the install kit added. And we can click Next a couple of times, and we're on our way to installing this thing. It's going to take a very long time for this to run, so let's come back when it's all done. Okay, we need to reboot our computer. Just let me log in. And now that we've completed the SQL Server installation, our next task is going to be to install AF. Since we've used the defaults for the SQL Server Express installation and everything's on the same box,
it's actually going to work entirely with the defaults. So all we have to do is click next, 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 finish. It's a really easy process. So let's go ahead and double click on that install kit and get started. I prefer to keep track of where my install kits are unzipping to, so I'm actually just going to make them unzip directly into this folder here instead of putting them into the temp directory. So now that the AF install is complete, we've completed step 3 in our PI Server pre-installation tasks. The next step is going to be to ensure that we have proper permissions. So in order to do that, we basically just want to verify that the user we're using right now is part of the local administrators group. And in order to do that, I'm going to run a command called netuser, and I'm going to use this shortcut to show my current username. So my current username is administrator, and I am a member of the local admins group. So, step 5, generate a license activation file. In order to do this, we're going to go to the technical support website. So let's head on over there at techsupport.osisoft.com. And I'm going to log out of my account because I need to use the account that's associated with this server. In this case, that's techsupport5@osisoft.com. Your technical support account will be associated with all your company's PI servers. So I just need to select the correct PI server for this site, which is my test EA server. And I'm going to go in here. I'm going to download this utility for generating a machine signature file. And we're going to use that to generate the license file. So I'll save this MSF WinGen, unzip it, run it, and it will generate an MSF file for me. I'm going to take that MSF file and I'm going to upload it back to OSIsoft, and they're going to use that to make my license file. So let's go ahead and click on the Generate License Activation file. I need to agree to the license agreement, and now I can download my license file. So I've extracted it so that the install kit will be able to see it when we're ready to run it. And the next thing we need to do here, step 6, is going to be to set the time on the PI system computers. So it's very important that we check our time and time zone on the PI server and all of the other machines that are going to be involved in data collection. It can be very painful to change this after the fact. We want to double check to make sure the Windows time zone TZ environment variable is not enabled. Now you're going to find in most cases that this is not enabled, but because it causes so many problems, it's worth taking a few moments just to double check and make sure. So looking through the system variables here, I see that there is no variable called TZ anywhere. So we're good. Step 8 is to download required software. So I believe I've already downloaded all the software I require. We can skip directly to step 9, which is to install the prerequisites. We've just gone through all of the prerequisites for the PI Server installation, so now it's finally time to actually double-click on that setup kit and get started installing the PI Server. The first thing we're going to see here, after we click on the OK button, is a warning telling us that we need our AF server to be available on the network. Well, AF's on the same box, so that should work out for us. Then it tells us everything it wants to install, and now it asks us where we want the SDK. We already said in our installation worksheet that we'd like to put that in the default location, so go ahead and just click Next there. Now we're at the PI Server install screen, and it wants us to find the license file. We put that in our Downloads folder and unzipped it into PyLicense. And then we need to connect to AF. So once we've established the connection to the AF server, we can click the Next button and proceed. We said we do want to enable the module database. And now we're going to have a look at the file locations. For the PI Server binaries, we were prepared to accept the default. But for the event queues, what I would like to do is not have them be in the DAT directory because there's a lot of other files in the DAT directory. So I just want to put them in their own folder where I can more easily manage them. So I'm going to put them in the queues folder. I see that they want to put my archives into ePyArch, and that's good. You might be curious about the settings on how it determines the archive size. So there's a couple of things that it looks at here. It looks at your maximum point count, which for our license file is quite large. And I just prefer lowercase letters. And I'm going to reduce my archive size because we're not actually going to be using 1,000,000 points. It selects the archive size based on the amount of RAM you have and based on the number of points you have licensed for. So this machine's licensed for 1,000,000, but we're not going anywhere near that. So I'm going to reduce the archive size a little bit. Once you've finished with all of this, the install will proceed. We need to run a process that allows us to have our module database replicated into AF. This is because AF is intended as the replacement for the module database. And what I need to do here is map my piadmins identity to a Windows user account. I'm going to map it to the administrators group on this machine. So when something gets created by piadmins in the module database, we need to know what kind of security to use for it in AF. And so what we're going to use will be the account that piadmins has been mapped to. In this case, the local admins group on this machine. Once our mapping is complete, we need to select the AF database that the module database is going to be synced to. So right now, there's actually no databases created on my AF server. So I'm just going to create a new database. So let's name it Chestnut AF. And we'll select that. And then it's going to create an element to sync the MDB to in the Chestnut AF database. So it is currently creating that. And when it's done, we should be ready to start up the PI server. With the AF synchronization complete, the next task is to start up the PI server. And when that's complete, we have installed our PI server. So the next thing we're going to do will be the post-install tasks. We've just completed the install of the PI server, and now we have to do our post-install configuration tasks. This is a very important part of the process. Once you've run that install kit, your job's not really done. So I'm going to go ahead and open up a new text file here to get me started along the way. Our first task will be to make sure the server is actually up and running, and we'll do that by checking on all the services that make up the PI server. We can do that with the PI System Management tools,
And under the operation branch, there's a section called PI services. So the only services that are stopped are the shutdown subsystem, the batch generator, and the recalculator. And it is normal for all of those services to be stopped. So everything that should be running is in fact running. So the next thing we'd like to know is if the server is actually processing data, and we can see that by looking at the snapshot and archive statistics. To begin with, I'd like to point out that there's two sections here. The top section you'll see are full of counters for the archive subsystem, and the bottom section has counters for the snapshot subsystem. We'll begin with the snapshot subsystem, and the first counter we want to look at is snapshot events, which represents all of the events coming into the PI server from all of your interfaces. The next one we'd like to look at is the events sent to queue. So this means the events that went through compression and are now on their way to the archive. So then the next counter we'll look at is the events that are actually in the queue. And we see that that's 0, and that's exactly the number we want because the queue is just the bridge in between the snapshot and the archive. So if we look above, there's a counter at the very top of the archive section called archived events. So in a perfect world, the events sent to queue is going to be equal to the number of archived events, and what that means is that everything is working correctly and we have nothing in the queues. Note that even under normal operation, we'll have one queue file. So on this server, it looks like everything is in good shape. Let's move on to our next check. So one last check to make sure that everything's good with the data flow is to actually look at the data. So let's just open up the archive editor and look up a tag and make sure we actually see events there for that tag. So I'm going to look up CDT158 and I'll look up for the past few hours. And I only get 2 events, but that's actually good. I've got one in the archive and one in the snapshot, and that means we're definitely seeing events in the archive. And it's sort of normal at this point that we only have a couple of events because the server's only maybe a half hour or a couple of hours old. So for now the data looks good, so let's move on to our configuration items. And our first configuration item is going to be the backups. So to begin with, let's go ahead and create a folder where the backups will reside. And once we've done that, we can open up a command prompt and navigate to the PI folder, and under there we'd like to go to the ADM folder. And when we get there, we're going to run a command called pibackup.bat. We're going to feed into that the path where we want our backups to go. And of course that's the folder that we just created a few seconds ago. And then at the end of that we're going to tack -install, and that's going to tell this tool to create a scheduled backup task every day at 3:15, and it's going to run a backup and put it in the folder that we just provided. If you look at the last line of the output, you can see that it has in fact successfully created the backup. So I always test everything after I configure it, but I know my backup's not going to work fully. The AF portion will not work correctly until after I reboot, so I'm going to postpone my test until after my reboot. So then the next thing we want to do is look at MDB to AF synchronization. And the first place we want to look at that is going to be within System Management Tools. And what we're looking for is to see a green light. And right now we have a green light, so we're in good shape. So let's go ahead and open up PI System Explorer, which is the builder/maintenance tool for AF. And what I'm looking for right now is just that the element exists where things are supposed to be synced. So everything here will be synced under this element called Chestnut MDB. So let's come back to System Management Tools, and we'll go to the module database, and let's go ahead and create a new module. In this new module that we create, what should happen is the MDB AF sync process should automatically synchronize that into AF. And when I first arrive in AF, I see this funny GUID titled thing, and I think that just means I need to refresh. And now we can see that I do have a copy of my newly created module has automatically appeared in AF. So let's go ahead and test this in the other direction. We'll create an element in AF. We will need to check it in to write the changes to the AF database. And then when we come back to System Management Tools in the module database, we should be able to see that this thing has also synchronized the other way. So this is a two-way process. And so now we've confirmed that everything is working with AF MDB sync, so I'm pretty happy with that. The next thing we can look at here is patches. So every once in a while we will have a PyServer patch, and it is worth taking the time to check and see if any patches have been released while you're installing your PyServer. We just need to go to the Download Center, and when you select the product that you're working with from the Download Center, you can see in the Details window that it has a list of associated files. And in that list of associated files, you should find any patches that you need to install. Well, it turns out that there actually is a patch available right now for the PyServer. So why don't we go ahead and download that thing? And I need to unzip this and open up the README file, and that's how I'm going to see what I'm supposed to do with this. So at the top of this list is a set of questions to ask whether or not you need this patch. I find the last question sort of amusing. It's, if you're not sure whether or not you need this patch, then you need this patch. Well, since we're not sure whether or not we need it, let's go ahead and install it. So the first thing we need to do is stop Pi. So let me go back to my command window and run piasrv stop and stop the Pi server, and we'll wait a few seconds while that stops. Once the Pi server is totally stopped, we need to go in and rename the old files that are going to be replaced. The binary files that they want us to rename are the archive subsystem, the base subsystem, and the net manager subsystem. And when I rename these things, I like to give them a name that's actually a little bit meaningful. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to tack the old version number onto the end. So these were from 3.4.390.16, and we're going to replace them with new versions that are 3.4.390.18. So let me just tack this 1.6 on the end, and that way I'll have a way of identifying these. If for some reason I need to roll back, it'll be easy to find the files that I want. So once I've renamed the old files, I can copy in the new ones from my zip folder. Then I need to go to the system root directory, and in there's a folder called symbols, and I'll have to find these PDB files for the same subsystems, and I'll find those and I'll rename the old ones and copy these new files in, just like I did for the binaries. Once the file copies are complete, we've done all of the file movement we need to do, and our patch is pretty much ready. So the last step would be to restart the Pi server, and since we wanted to reboot at some point today anyway, why don't we reboot the machine, and the Pi server will get started up automatically when the machine is rebooting. Okay, so we're back from our reboot now. And one of the things that I like to do on all the Pi servers that I work on is create a shortcut on the desktop to make it easier to view the logs. So I'm going to browse to the Pi server ADM folder, which will be in Program Files Pi ADM, and I'm going to select a program called pigetMessage. And at the end of the pigetMessage, I'm going to tack on -F, which is going to cause the message log to flush continually into a command window for me so I can view the messages as they're rolling by. I'll make a few edits to the appearance of this thing and give it a slightly better name, and then we'll have an easy to use log window that we can open up as soon as we log on to our Pi server. It's good to be able to view the messages quickly and easily while I'm working on a machine. I hope you'll find this tool valuable because I really do. Now that that's done, why don't we take a quick look at some data and make sure that everything's working okay with our Pi server. So I'm just going to do a quick search for all of my tags and pull them into the current values plugin in System Management Tools. You'll notice that a couple of these tags here seem to have GUID type names. Those are internal system tags, and I'm just going to remove them from the list so that I don't have to look at them. Otherwise, I'm happy with this. I see that I have some new data since the reboot, and that's really what I'm looking for here. Now let's just do a quick check to make sure that our patch was successful, and we can do that from the Pi version plugin to System Management Tools. So it's under Operation, and if we just go to Pi version here, it lists the version that's currently loaded of every subsystem. And what we want to see here is that Net Manager and Archive and Base are all using the .18 version rather than the .16 version. Next, we can test to see whether or not our backups are working. So in order to do that, the first thing we need to do is actually make one of the backups run. Now it's a scheduled task and it's scheduled to run at 3:15 a.m. But since I only just installed it a few minutes ago, I know it hasn't run yet. So I'm going to actually just go and run the thing directly from the task scheduler. And I'll wait a few seconds to let it run, but then I'm just going to, because I'm impatient, I'm going to check on it using a command line tool. So I'll open up a command prompt and go to my piadm folder. And then there's a command I can run, which is pirtool-backup-query, which will ask the backup subsystem if there's a backup currently running. My backup has an end time, meaning that the backup's complete. I can go and check on the log files from my backup, and what I'm really looking for is to check and make sure that AF got backed up as well. I can also look through my backup folders and make sure that all of the archives and DAT files that I would expect to be there are there as well. You can never really predict what might consume disk space on a server, so one of the things we can do to try to protect ourselves from that is to create some extra archives now. And what that does is it effectively reserves a little bit of space for the archives. And creating new archives is really simple. We just go to the Archives tab in System Management Tools, hit the New Archive button, and basically from here we just click the OK button and it will create an archive for us. And then we'll go ahead and do that again to get another archives. And when we've completed this, we have a half a gig of space pre-allocated for archives in case somehow all the other free space on the server gets used up. Of course, you could do this much more than just 2 times if you wanted to pre-allocate more space than that. If there's any possibility somebody might want to backfill data to the server before 2007, we need to add in a file that will help us translate the daylight savings time changes prior to 2007. From my localhost.tz patches, select the one that is correct for this time zone. So I am actually in Pacific time. So I'm going to take the Pacific time file, I'm going to copy it to the DAT directory of my Pi server, and I'm going to rename it localhost.tz. And when I do that, and I rerun the pidiag-tz command, you'll see that it knows about more than just one set of time zone rules. And you'll be able to see the difference pretty easily. There will be quite a few more rules than we saw when we ran this command earlier. And with that, I have done all of the post-install configuration that I want to do today. We began with a totally blank operating system, installed a SQL Server, and then we installed AF, then we installed the PI server, and then we did our post-install configuration. And I hope you found all of these videos to be useful. Thank you for watching.